Thank you for joining me once again, where people continue to be wrong on the interwebs without let or hindrance. They continue to be recidivist offenders. They continue to be Chris from Plant Munches, or Plant Chompers, or Brain Cell Chompers, or whatever he calls it. Chris is one of these infuriating characters who drips Dunning Kruger from every pore of his being, who is so vastly, grossly destitute of competence in the area that he's talking about that he's unable to even grasp the level of his own incompetence. Chris is also an individual who lacks the intestinal and testicular fortitude to face me like a man for a discussion about his ridiculous ideas, and would rather make still more vacuous, ridiculous, erroneous videos about stuff he knows nothing about in an area that he has no training in whatsoever, that being health, nutrition, physiology, anything basically relating to the stuff that I absolutely am actually an expert in, Chris. And you should probably front up to me for a discussion at some point, or you can just keep making these videos and I'll keep putting you right where you're wrong. And spoiler, everybody, that is everywhere. Absolutely everywhere. Right, Chris, make some progress. Tell us all about how Tim Noakes is wrong or something. Good-o.
You characterized the higher carbohydrate diet as genocide, I think was your words. Noakes has characterized mainstream diet.
Yeah, I really wish Tim hadn't have laughed at that. That's not funny. He's right.
Dietary advice as genocide. Pretty strong words.
I am at MIT's Media Lab today because I just gave a TEDx talk to a packed audience. I have a lopsided beard today. This is forest on the left and farmland on the right. And they even cracked a joke about desertification, deserts where nothing grows.
Yeah, that is so funny, Chris. I'm only not laughing outwardly for fear that my sides shall actually split, because that was so funny.
Beard was to represent our forests because we've converted almost half of them globally to farmland.
Yes. A lot of forest has been cut down to clear land for human food production purposes. Most of it, Chris, for monocropping, not for grazing, in fact, actually. Okay?
And that is driven primarily by the food we eat.
Yes, plants. Inappropriate non-food substances for human beings, plants, monocrops.
My previous episode on YouTube was about Dr. Bickman's claim that you can thrive on a carnivore diet, but it's impossible as a vegan.
He's correct. You cannot thrive on a vegan diet. It is impossible because that diet is vastly, hugely, grossly destitute of required nutrient for human beings, demonstrably so. Perhaps we should ask a vegan whether or not that is so. I would go with a doctorally qualified vegan, let's say Dr. Blake. Perhaps he could give us an opinion on the matter. There we go. There it is. Pretty much, yep, destitute. Okay, what's next?
Reading his book and listening to his talks really helped me understand the comments I'm receiving on my channel. When a scientist and university professor speaks with such great confidence, it's understandable that many thousands of people will embrace his ideas and share them passionately on social media. The dilemma we all face, though, is there are university scientists whose ideas completely oppose each other. How do mere mortals like us make sense of that?
Well, probably the first thing, Chris, for people like yourself to do is to stop trying to be all things to all people at all times, actually. Stop painting yourself out as an expert in nutrition, because you're not. You have no qualifications in nutrition, no understanding of nutrition or human health or physiology or anything remotely similar. You're an ideologue who wants to talk about nutrition because you want people to feel about nutrition the way you feel about it. Well, your feelings about nutrition are irrelevant, Chris. The only thing that's relevant about how a human being should eat is the science, such that it is, that underpins us and informs us on that topic. Something about which you know nothing because you think nutritional epidemiology or health-based epidemiology is science. It isn't. I know I've done some in my time. I've been involved in some actual epidemiology work in the fields of nutrition, in the fields of health science and medicine, Chris. Have you? Your epidemiological work has been in tracing the sources of environmental polluters, in my understanding. Correct me if I'm wrong, please, Chris, but I believe that's the work you've been doing, which is actually science-based. That's actually evidence-based. We're looking for where is this toxin coming from using epidemiological methodologies. That's great. Okay, that's not the kind of epidemiology that's done in nutrition and health. Okay? You cannot inform on cause and effect using associative data. Okay? We'll get to that, though, when we get to it. What is next?
One of the comments from that episode was from Darkfield Carnivore, who wrote, I
love it when supporters of my fine, actually science-based channel get their name up in lights there and other channels. Well done, Darkfield Carnivore. Carry on, soldier.
Challenge you to attempt to discredit Tim Noakes and Gary Fetke. That caught my attention because I've had high regard for South African Professor Tim Noakes for maybe 30 years. I have loved Ironman and ultra running races, and his Lore of Running book is a classic.
Yeah, notice how he's reissued it, though, since he learned how in error he was about carbohydrates and diet previously, and he's now basically reissued the book with those chapters torn out, basically. Interesting, isn't it?
Amazon tells me I bought a newer edition of it in 2007, the year I ran South Africa's 56-mile Comrades Marathon.
Yeah, we don't care, Chris, that you've done that. That's not of any interest to us whatsoever. Please do carry on with your actual talk about why Tim Noakes is wrong.
A very experienced runner collapsed right in front of me near the finish line of that race, and the paramedics who were right there couldn't save him.
Okay, well, that's absolutely tragic, Chris. That's a horrible thing for that person's family and loved ones, etc. But so what? What does that have to do with your video in any way? We don't care.
2 runners to die that year. Dr. Noakes wrote papers and a book about it, which I found very persuasive. In those days, my 3 go-to experts were Dave Scott, the 6-time Ironman world champion who said he ate a plant-dominant diet with some fish.
He doesn't do that now. He was never a vegan because of the fish, and now he promotes an entirely different sort of diet. One that's much more like a species-appropriate, species-specific, a much more sensible diet. I wonder why that is, Chris.
Scott Jurek, the 7-time Western States 100 champion who eats a purely vegan diet.
Well, that's what he says he does. I don't believe it for a second myself.
And Dr. Noakes, who advised a high-carb diet in his book, The Lore of Running.
Yeah, but now he's ripped those chapters out, remember, because he said I was wrong. So 2 out of 3 disagree with your one who purports to be a vegan. So given that all we need to prove a point is consensus, apparently, according to Chris, we're done here, Chris. Join me next time when someone else will be wrong on the interwebs. Oh, all right, send you here. We'll deal with Chris in an actually scientific way because it's much more fun. Because this really does get a lot more fun.
But something abruptly changed with Dr. Noakes.
I was promoting
Yes, he stopped being wrong and started being right.
a high carbohydrate, low fat diet for 33 years. And then I fortunately came across the new Atkins for a New You. I purchased the book, and within 3 hours, I realized that I'd been wrong for 33 years, and I decided to change.
Not only that, but I checked in with Dave Scott, who I've raced against twice because he's in my age group.
Who cares?
So I want to just talk about one topic that really affects skin health, and that's the high intake of polyunsaturated fats.
And he has gone the way of Dr. Noakes, recommending a keto diet, low in polyunsaturated fat, high in saturates.
There you go. So 2 out of 3, we're done. Thanks, Chris. Join us next time.
I think about eliminating these polyunsaturated fats and going to saturated fats. And the saturated fats, coconut oil is always on my A list. Butter, lard, ghee, sour cream, those are all on the A1 list. And get rid of the other ones that I've just talked about.
Interesting when you have an opportunity to have a really good peruse, I think. A really good sort of inspection of folks who have been or are involved in ultra-endurance sports of any kind. It's very, very interesting to observe these people, don't you think? I'm talking about the apparent effects on long-term health. That's for another day. I just thought I'd throw that out there. Endurance sports are in my book, as an exercise physiologist first and foremost, actually, Chris, totally contraindicated activities for human beings. We shouldn't be doing that or attempting to do that. We shouldn't be lauding people that do that. It's really, really apparently very, very problematic for long-term health. Anyway, carry on.
That's 2 out of 3 endurance experts I really respect. Better check this out. Dr. Noakes has written a lot of books on nutrition since his change of mind, promoting high-fat, high-animal foods and low carbs. My first stop was his talk on the cholesterol hypothesis. Part 1 alone is 3 hours and got 826,000 views.
So?
And then I decided, well, there were 20 stories that the diet dictators who prosecuted me didn't want you to know. And I'm not going to go through all 20, but I'm going to choose the top 10.
Boy, that sounded conspiratorial. Most scientists don't talk that way.
Yeah, most scientists, though, Chris, also don't have to spend years and years and years in a courtroom defending themselves against a scurrilous and baseless accusation and an attempt to remove their livelihood and their professional accreditations, both in academic circles and also in medical circle as well, as Tim is a member of both those circles. So Tim has every right to be pissed beyond belief, actually, at the vast mistreatment that he received at the hands of the South African authorities in this respect. And I hope he sued them for every penny they've got. And, you know, if he didn't, he's a bigger man than I would be in his shoes. He's got every right to blow the conspiracy trumpet. And he's absolutely spot on correct in having done so. Okay? Chris, you really ought to do more than 3 seconds of research before you open your ignorant, stupid mouth on any topic, Tim Noakes or science, you know, because all you're going to do in this video, which I know we're only really getting warmed up on at this stage, but you're just going to make yourself an absolute fool, an absolute charlatan. You are going to point directly and squarely to your own vast destitution of competence in what you're talking about. Your steaming, excremental, pustulous hypocrisy of an order that is frankly unbelievable. It's so bad it's actually funny, and we will laugh. Stay tuned, boys and girls, because you are going to get a laugh out of this. You're going to enjoy this. This is going to be great. I should stop talking and let Chris make some progress so that we can get through this before it gets too late in the year. Off you go, Chris.
But Tim is a smart guy and has researched this exhaustively, so I'll try to shake it off and keep an open mind. Who can give a...
Chris, the furthest thing from an apt description of your what's in your head, I'm not even going to say mind, is open. You are anything but open. You are a closed-minded, arrogant Dunning Kruger sufferer of the highest order. You are destitute of competence to speak on any aspect of human health, human physiology, human nutrition requirements, or the epidemiology of health, nutrition, or medical science in any way. You are so far out of your lane, it's a laugh. But anyway, and you're an ideologue who's here to make money by making noise in the vegan echo chamber and fleecing other stupid people of their money to support your little sing-song. Okay? That's all that's going on here. I'm here to actually educate people, and I'll get to that as soon as you start trying to do science for our amusement. So do stick around. This is not just a have a go at Chris video. I'm going to have a real good go at Chris, but I'm going to do it scientifically when he gets to that bit. All right, off you go.
A 3-hour lecture and get nearly 1 million views.
Number one will shock everyone, I think. The claim I make here is that the true cause of atherosclerosis or coronary heart disease is unknown. So how can...
Okay, I disagree with Tim Noakes on that completely. It is known, absolutely, without any question in my mind, as a cardiovascular pathophysiologist. It's one of my other hats that I wear, for those that want to know. It's exercise physiology, it's the physiology of rest and exercise, I guess. Human physiology, first and foremost. Human nutrition was my second advanced research degree, and the third one is in cardiovascular pathophysiology. Then I have some supporting knowledge, experience, and actually peer-reviewed publications in the area of pure and applied statistics, statistical inference, research methodology, epidemiology, etc. Chris, okay? So that's where I'm coming from. And I can tell you without question, Tim Noakes has got that wrong. We do absolutely know what the cause of heart disease is. All right, I'll give it to you. It's chronic systemic inflammation, underpinned also by glycative, oxidative damage to various blood components, any combination of either or both, and usually mechanical damage to the vascular epithelial beds as a function of turbulence born of hypertension, basically. Eliminate those things, heart disease problem sorted pretty much, actually. That's for another day, though. Let's hear some more from Chris.
Can anyone make that suggestion? Well, the answer comes to me after reading these two articles by Stebbins and some of his other work.
I didn't know who William Stebbins was. These papers are from the early 90s and were behind paywalls, so a few yellow flags were popping.
Okay, so anything behind a paywall is no good, Chris? That's some good logicking. That's some good science right there. Well, I happen to agree that science should not be behind a paywall under any circumstances. It should be public domain. That's not the way the world works. Publishers have, in the past, got themselves involved in the area of academia and publishing academic works in such a way as to protect their financial interests, and they use paywalls to do that. I disagree with that. Perhaps, though, Chris, you could bring yourself up to speed with some of the methodologies that are available to circumvent those paywalls, because they do exist, okay? That would take doing more than a couple of minutes worth of research on your part, though, perhaps. I know that's a problem for you.
Up in my head. First, I didn't know how many of the 826,000 viewers of this talk would purchase access to these papers.
Or need to, because none of them needed to. You can get those papers for free using one of those subterfuges that I spoke about.
Study them like I did. Second, Stebbins acknowledges financial support from New Zealand's National Heart Foundation. Cool.
Why is that cool? New Zealand's Heart Foundation, I speak as, number one, a cardiovascular pathophysiologist, and number two, Chris, also as a New Zealander who is well aware of what the New Zealand Heart Foundation is about, what their position statements are, their opinions are on various topics, and the bill of goods that they're pushing to the New Zealand public. And I can tell you that they're a deeply misanthropic, deeply bastardised organisation of individuals whose pure interest is their own survival at the end of the tax year. Nothing to do with public health at all. That's my opinion. Doesn't have to be anybody else's, but it's based on a very, very good understanding of the science, the cardiovascular pathophysiology, and what is in fact actually likely to lead New Zealanders to better cardiac health. And the New Zealand Heart Foundation have that very, very badly wrong. So I don't know why you would think that's okay. That's an appeal to authority, appeal to consensus fallacy statement from you, Chris. That's, again, another example of some pretty destitute logicking.
The New Zealand Dairy Board,
New Zealand Dairy Board. Conflict of interest, Conflict of interest is bad. Remember that, kids. Industry funding invalidates science, says Chris. That's what he's implying here. Oops, industry funding, it's no good. All right.
And the New Zealand Meat Producers Board,
Ooh, 002 sources of industry funding for this particular author. Must be no good. Must have no credibility. Okay, if you say so, Chris.
Marion Nessel told me that after writing so many books on how industry funds nutrition research, she can usually tell from the first few lines of a paper who funded it.
Yeah. 90-something% of all scientists agree with their funding source. Sure.
Industry-funded papers are usually written to cast doubt on science and create confusion.
Indeed. Okay, fine. Yep, cool.
And these two papers are written in exactly that way.
If you say so, Chris. Industry funding is bad. I think he's been clear, boys and girls, don't you? I think he's been really clear on industry funding, and Chris is suggesting that an author with 2 sources of funding from industry clearly should be disregarded, absolutely, as being someone that we can trust with science at all. Okay, Chris, that's cool.
And he says the problem is the epidemiologists have misled us because they've confused cause and reasons.
Yeah, exactly. Epidemiologists in the field of health, human nutrition, etc., those ones in particular, Chris, are pseudoscientists. They have misled the readership and the general public at large into believing that they are scientists. They're nothing of the sort. They have led the readership and the general public at large to believe that they are able to inform on cause and effect by using words like risk or hazard or, that kind of thing. Or effect is another word they like to use. Effects, the effects of this, the effects of that. Effect is the conjugate of cause, as we know, Chris, those of us that understand basic English. And as such, that's where nutritional and health-based epidemiologists go wrong, among other many very serious flaws in their actual conduct and behaviour, Chris. But they're leading people to believe that they're able to inform on cause and effect in any way, shape or form, and they simply are not. You cannot inform on cause and effect with associative data. You have to do an experiment. They're not doing experiments. They're not controlling anything at all. They have deeply confounded data sets, and their data sets are usually fabricated. I'll get to that later too, though, perhaps, if it comes up in your talk, and I know it will.
Whatever, these 2 papers deal with one of life's most fascinating and important topics, causation.
Yes, causation, which is informed upon by scientists doing experimental, controlled, disciplined, properly observed, interventional studies, Chris. That's how we inform on cause and effect, and in no other way.
We all deal with that every single day. Why did my car not start? Why is my son struggling with math? Why do I have pain in my stomach?
Okay, well, none of those 3 questions can be answered by an epidemiologist whatsoever. The third one I can give you an answer to, Chris. It's your diet, son. Sort it out.
I get asked all the time to recommend books that I love, but I've never found one compelling enough about causation to recommend, even though...
That's because your field is epidemiology, Chris, and you cannot, as an epidemiologist, inform on cause and effect. In health science, in nutrition science, in any aspect of hard health outcome as that relates to nutritional input or drug intervention. That work is unable to inform on that kind of cause and effect. The work you did, as I understand it, was in finding the source of environmental toxins being released by naughty companies using epidemiological methodologies. That's detective work and it's actual science, but it's not cause and effect science. Okay? That kind of thing is valuable. That kind of work is valuable. Perhaps you should focus on doing that instead of talking about nutrition, which is something that you know nothing about whatsoever. That's for another day.
Though I would love to, but that changed this year when I found Steven Pinker's book, Rationality, which has a great chapter on causation. I'm here on Harvard's campus where he's a professor, and I wish I'd thought ahead and asked if we could meet so I could interview him, but I'm an
that would have been a good idea.
idiot, and I didn't.
Yes, you are an idiot, Chris. That's one of the first things I've ever heard you say that was actually reasonable and rational. You really are an idiot. You're also, as I've said, a very, very serious sufferer of Dunning Kruger and really also of arrogance beyond belief. Talking about stuff that you know nothing about, whatever.
But the real point is that if you remove the cause, the disease disappears. So if you think you are treating the cause and the disease...
Prospectively is what Tim meant there.
Disease doesn't disappear, then you're not treating the cause.
That's a definition of cause I hadn't heard before.
Yeah, me neither, because Tim left out the word prospectively there, and he should have put prospectively.
So we think smoking is a cause of lung cancer, and if we stop smoking, lung cancer goes away?
That's just a ridiculous straw man.
type 2 diabetes and heart disease can at least be partially reversed if they haven't progressed too far.
Yes, both of those things can be reversed.
But what about type 1 diabetes?
That can be reversed too. It is possible, Chris. Yes.
Alzheimer's disease?
Yeah, that too.
What about skin damage from a lifetime in the sun?
Yes, that can be reversed too.
One of the things that was bothering me about these papers is they're more than 20 years old, and there have been...
Okay, so anything old is no good? Chris?
some amazing breakthroughs over the last 20 years. One breakthrough is the advent of Mendelian randomization.
Oh, here we fucking go. Oh, boy, this is where the incompetence really kicks into high gear.
Studies. So you know what randomized control trials are?
Yes, we do, but most even scientists don't, because many of them are referring to the kind of studies that they've done in human nutrition, human health studies as randomized and controlled, neither of which they usually are. In fact, actually, anyway, go on.
The big confounding factor with randomized controlled trials is how short-term they are relative to the time it takes to form chronic diseases.
Sure.
If you did a randomized controlled trial of smoking, you'd probably conclude that it was healthy, because in the time frame of a randomized controlled trial, you'd find that you'd lose weight, you'd
Sure, absolutely.
relax, be happy. It isn't until about 20 years that you see the negative effects of smoking begin
Absolutely.
to appear.
Well, when I say absolutely, I'm happy to say absolutely. I'm happy to accept that epidemiological work is a pretty good indication of a likely outcome, on the basis that the incidence of, for example, lung cancer in smoking populations increases relatively by 11,500% per pack year of smoking. That's really, really hard to ignore. That's a very, very large change in the incidence of that particular disease process. And as such, it's a pretty good indication that there's something worth looking for there to do experimental work on, to absolutely pin down cause and effect. Unfortunately, or fortunately, we can't do that work at all and never will be able to, because ethics won't allow it. And people are now at least clued up enough that they wouldn't probably sign up for such a study. Okay, so we have to stay with what we've got, which is the epidemiology such that it is, and the epidemiology on smoking such that it is very, very powerful. It's very good. It's a very, very huge change in the incidence of a disease process. Really quite meaningful. Okay.
Longer-term studies like the famous Harvard Nurses' Health Study have confounding factors too, which
Yes, they do. They're confounded as absolute hell. They've got more holes than your average kitchen colander. Those studies are not worth the paper they're written on in terms of cause and effect. Health-based, nutrition-based epidemiology is hypothesis-generating pilot work, which unfortunately cannot be followed up with the actual science that would be required to confirm or dismiss hypotheses. It's actually a waste of time. It's pseudoscience. Now, if there were health-based or nutrition-based epidemiological studies that came up with anything like 11,500% incidence change for a disease process as that relates to some input or other, that would be useful. Now, in the field of nutrition and hard health outcomes of any kind in human beings, there are no studies that get anywhere close to that. 10, 12, 15, sometimes as huge as 30% changes in things, relatively. That's quite a bit different from 11,500%, isn't it, Chris? Quite a bit different. As an absolute change in incidence, anything related to any aspect of human nutrition is just swamped by signal-to-noise ratio. There's nothing there of utility to any living human being, not over a 100-year lifespan. It's a waste of time. A competent statistician, a competent scientist in the field of epidemiology of health and nutrition would tell you that, Chris. How do I know? Because I am one and I'm telling you that. I've looked at this work very carefully. I know what's in it, okay? There is, however, some very interesting epidemiology, health-based wise in terms of other things, not nutrition-based. I'm talking about statin medications, for example, which will come up later in this video. And there is at least one study with quite a reasonable sample size that suggests that the relative increase in the incidence of ALS, an invariably fatal neurodegenerative disease, in populations of patients who are prescribed statins is something like 10,800% increased per moderate dose of statins. I can't remember the exact dosage, it doesn't matter. But it's a similar sort of thing to the smoking. Okay, similarly devastating. All right? So that's interesting, but we'll get back to that if it becomes relevant at any point later. Because I just know that Chris is going to say Tim's all wrong about heart disease. He's going to say it's cholesterol that causes it, is Chris, without any evidence that is so.
Been endlessly talked about, but they are the kind of study which eventually unraveled the long-term unhealthy effects of smoking.
Not effects. Effect is the conjugate of cause. There has been no experimental study to support that claim. It's a very, very strong inference by way of association. That is how you should describe it.
Genetic studies where scientists can see the genes you were dealt with at birth, those will never change in your lifetime. One of Gregor Mendel's laws of genetics is you were randomly assigned genes from both your dad and your mom at conception.
Well, that's not random. Just to be clear.
And we know which assortment of genes predisposes you to high LDL cholesterol.
Yes, but so what?
I pretty much have all of them. Bummer. And
it's not a bummer, actually. I'll get to that later too.
Then it becomes a pretty cost-effective and accurate study to determine who got the high LDL-causing genes and who...
Yeah, but so what?
Who gets heart disease.
Yes, but that's not cause and effect, is it? That's an association, and it's confounded. And also, the reports from the data sets of people talking about this particular area in Mendelian studies are lying. They are adjusting their data sets. That is fabrication. A scientist, Chris, plans their research intervention study in advance. They control all degrees of freedom that could confound, bastardize, or otherwise degrade the value of the finding. They then make the observations under control and observation, and then they report what it was that they observed. Health and nutrition-based epidemiologists control nothing whatsoever, collect all data, but with no observation of that data. They believe what people tell them. It's usually respondent data. Okay, in Mendelian randomization, it's genes, which people can't lie about, so that's fine, great. And it's diagnoses of heart disease, which people can't lie about, great. So that's at least that bit taken care of in terms of the Mendelian stuff. But nonetheless, it's still not a cause and effect relationship because they don't control everything else. And they adjust their outcomes on the basis that they haven't controlled in the first place, without any actual logic behind what they're doing. They do multiple regression analyses, which are just as unable to inform on cause and effect or petition out cause and effect as a single variate regression is. In fact, the errors compound. So you get an artificially reduced R-squared value, residuals around your trend line, but you've got compounding errors, you've got compounding inapplicability in the real world. You've got fantasy. It belongs in the fiction section, Chris. Okay.
Many confounders removed, and the big bonus is it can
except for the ones that actually make sense to remove.
Reflect all the junk food you ate as a kid. You know you did.
We've assembled this distinguished panel of experts to test a brand new breakfast cereal, Dinky Donuts.
They certainly look like little donuts.
Because these studies begin at conception. And if you take all the rigorous studies and...
Right, all the rigorous studies. Number one, who is it that determines rigor, Chris? Is it you? Are you qualified to determine what's rigorous in the field of nutrition-based or health-based epidemiology? Also, let's have a look at this chart here. He's about to talk about the blue line there. These are the Mendelian studies. Please identify what studies these are. Anybody. If you can't do it from the chart, and you won't be able to, because all we've got here is things like LDLGRS, ApoB, LDLR, RS2002, blah, 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 blah. And you have to look really closely to be able to read them because they're very small. And those studies are not listed under the chart. Or what are the citations? Which studies are these? How do we know they're rigorous? How can we go and check they're rigorous?
Including the ones of the last few decades, you get this stunning chart.
It's stunning. That's a very scientific word, Chris. It's a stunning chart. What it is, however, is just another form. Ignore the red data set with the red line and the grey data set with the grey line. Take that completely out of there, because that's not what Chris is talking about right now. He's talking about the blue line with the light blue data points around it. Okay? Stunning. Okay, scientific word, not. Secondly, what you're looking at there is an association. An associative data set. This is not an experiment. Are we done? No, you're not done, probably. Okay, carry on.
The red dots you see are from randomized control trials.
No, they're not either randomized nor well-controlled. In fact, and look at the residuals around that trend line. Look how wide that data is dispersed around that trend line. Signal-to-noise ratio completely swamps that. You could draw any number of trend lines through that without largely eroding the value of R squared, which I'll also point to the fact that there is no R squared value given there whatsoever. So you'd have to estimate it yourself visually, or if you didn't want to actually remake the data set and do the analysis yourself, that looks like 0.6 maybe at best, or 0.36 for an R squared value. That's really not of any particular predictive value, actually, Chris. Sorry, your data set is, while ever it's got a huge number of person years of follow-up behind it, perhaps, it's actually not particularly useful. It's very, very noisy, signal-to-noise ratio-wise. Okay.
7 of them, medium follow-up 5 years. The gray dots are for more long-term observational trials, 8 of them.
Right, so not controlled. Associative. Healthy user bias, we're done.
And the light blue dots are the newer Mendelian randomizations.
Associative, and associating what with what, actually. Exactly. Well, we'll get to that soon, because it's interesting what might be being associated with what in terms of all of this.
Studies.
Stunning chart, though, Chris. Stunning.
14 of them with median follow-up the equivalent of 52 years. What? Too bad we had to wait until the early 2000s for the Human Genome Project to complete and make these studies possible. You
know what else is too bad? It's too bad that this is an associative data set and it's an association between a couple of things that isn't actually of any utility, as it turns out, and it doesn't speak to cause and effect in any way, shape or form, Chris. That's also a real shame for you.
For randomized trials, the horizontal scale means how much LDL was reduced by administering a statin.
Well, how much did you reduce LDL by having a certain gene, and with comparison to whom? Who was the matched pair for these genetically low expressors of LDL? Whoops. Are we done? What's next?
The scale is
science, though, bitches.
In European units. In American, that 2.0 on the far right would read 77 units of LDL reduction. And what you see is lowering LDL in all the trials reduced the risk of coronary disease.
No, not risk. Associative studies are incapable, uncapable, of informing on risk, because risk is a cause and effect statement. It implies that a change in behavior of some kind can predictably affect the likelihood of an outcome in either a population or in a given individual. It's even less likely that it applies to any given individual, because everyone's a little bit different, than it is to apply to a population, because it's associative and not cause and effect. Uncontrolled and usually adjusted, in other words, fabricated. So no, not risk, Chris, not risk at all. Incidents. And it would only be a report on incidents if it wasn't adjusted, which it is, so it's fantasy. Fiction section. Great story. More emphasis on the dragons next time, if you please. Perhaps a bit less incest. And after 8 seasons, we want a better ending than the one we got. Seriously, HBO, do better.
Disease, and it didn't matter whether the participants already had heart disease or not.
It does. It really does matter, actually. If you look at sub-fractioning out your populations, it really does matter. So you've got that wrong too, Chris.
All had the same reduction in risk.
No, and not risk. Incidents. Fallacious incidents. Made-up incidents. Great story.
For the Mendelian randomization, it was how much your collection of genes kept your cholesterol low. Like my 93-year-old father-in-law who can eat anything and his LDL stays low and arteries clear.
Yeah, but that's not a cause and effect thing. Because LDL doesn't cause artery blockage in any way, shape or form. So your logic fails there again, Chris.
But if you got lucky with your genes, you can post on social media that you eat lots of saturated fat and your LDL stays low. Proof that the concern about saturated fat is bunk and everyone should eat like you do.
No, that's not proof of anything. That's no more proof of anything than what you've been presenting there on that stunning chart, Chris, whatsoever.
I know what you're thinking. You've got to ask yourself one question. Do I feel lucky? Well, do you, punk?
In the meantime, a very long list of respected scientists.
Respected scientists, you say? A very long list of them, yes.
Took this data to mean LDL is causal.
They took that data to mean LDL is causal, did they? I wonder at all, Chris, whether or not that long list of authors, respected authors, that took this data to be causal, I wonder if they were at all paid by industry to say that. Because remember, Chris, conflict of interest is bad and it's a reason to ignore everything they have to say and move on. So shall we have a look and see whether these authors that wrote this paper here, shall we have a look and see whether they were paid by industry at all? Shall we? Let's do that. Right, okay, so we can move on. Good.
Heart disease.
This is a key point. Reduction in incidence rather than elimination of the disease precludes a causal relationship. So if you think you're treating the cause, but all that happens is the incidence of the disease reduces, but does not disappear, you haven't found the cause.
Keep in mind that Dr. Noakes is quoting 30-year-old papers before...
Again, things that are bad, things that are old are bad, are they, Chris? Okay.
Mendelian randomization was even an idea.
Yeah, well, it's still just an idea, and that's not a very good one, Chris. It's a fucking stupid idea to suggest remotely that a Mendelian study is able to inform on cause and effect any more than any other form of association. Because what was associated with what in that chart? Shall we have a look at it, just so that people can see how destitute, how bad it really is, what we're actually looking at here. Okay. All right, here is not that exact data set, because again, I couldn't find out which papers that was in that European consensus panel bought and paid for opinion statement by those people. Here's a similar data set published in a similar sort of itinerant pseudo-academic journal. There are a couple of real red flags immediately here. Straight away, there's one. Cardiometabolic risk, it says. Cardiometabolic risk. No, this is an associative epidemiological style study in the guise of randomization Mendelian. It's nothing of the sort. It's just an associative study that controls nothing. And it talks about risk. Well, no. So no credibility before we even start reading. And then it starts, the very first word is effect. Well, effect is the conjugate of cause, and this is an associative study, so it can't inform on effect. So 3 words. 2 words up here, the first word of the title, and we're done. Absolutely done. Okay, effect of long-term exposure to lower low-density lipoprotein cholesterol. Okay, interesting. So they've tracked people for a lifetime to measure what their actual LDL cholesterol actually was at all times, repeatedly, multiple times a week, every week for the whole period of time, have they? No? Okay. Are we done? Yet? No. Okay. Beginning early in life. Okay. So at conception, that's pretty early in life. Sure. Though you haven't actually measured their LDL, have you? You've measured a couple of SNPs, various different SNPs that tend to be associated with lowered LDL throughout the lifespan, but you haven't actually measured that in your populations, have you? So we're done. All right. Early in life on the risk. No, it's not risk. It's association. And it's an association between a genetic expression and something else, we'll find out what in a minute, of coronary heart disease. Okay, coronary heart disease is pretty well established. We know what that is. We know how it's diagnosed. It's pretty well defined. Fine. All right. Objectives. The purpose of the study was to estimate the effect, of long-term exposure, blah, blah, blah. Okay, yeah, we know about that. Background. LDL-C is causally related to the risk of CHD. Well, no, it's not. We're done here. These authors have no credibility. It is not. There is no evidence extant anywhere in the literature that that statement is correct and true. These authors have a priori decided what cause and effect relationship is at play. We're done. That's not science. The role of the scientist is to disprove him or herself. This is an ideologically based piece of claptrap. This is nonsense. Okay. However, the association between long-term exposure to lower LDL-C beginning early in life and the risk, of cardiovascular coronary heart disease has not been reliably quantified. And still it hasn't by these people at all. Okay. We conducted a series of meta-analyses, to estimate, Okay. The effect of long-term exposure to lower LDL-C on the risk? No. Of coronary heart disease mediated by 9 polymorphisms in 6 different genes. Okay. We then combine these Mendelian randomization studies in a meta-analysis to obtain a more precise estimate of the effect of long-term exposure to lower LDL-C and compared it with the clinical benefit associated with the same magnitude of LDL-C reduction during treatment with a statin. Well, that's not real clear what they actually did, is it? I get this is just the abstract. Perhaps they've been clearer in the actual method section of what it was they actually did and exactly what they are actually comparing with what on their stunning chart, Chris, perhaps. Result, all 9 polymorphisms were associated with a highly consistent reduction in the risk, no, not risk, of coronary heart disease per unit lower LDL-C with no evidence of heterogeneity. All the studies showed the same thing. Okay. Blah-de-blah-de-blah-de-blah-de-blah. Conclusions. Well, what we already said a priority. LDL cholesterol causes heart disease. Okay. Okay. So before we get to what they actually did do, let's have a look and see whether or not we can see a statement around conflict of interest at all. I haven't even looked for that, to be fair, in this paper. Let me see. No statement around conflict of interest. None at all, apparently. So, do they have something to hide? You would expect there to be a statement saying the authors are not aware of any conflict of interest at the time of writing of this paper. They didn't say that. Perhaps they didn't want to show one like the European Consensus Panel had to show. Who knows? That's hard to say. Anyway, let's look at what they, let's have a look at their chart. Here it is. It's very similar to the one you saw previously that Chris showed. And it says, look, we've got this relationship here between lower LDL-C and proportional risk. Okay. So lower LDL-C, lower than what? Because what they would have had to have done was measure the actual LDL expressed by these actual participants who happen to have this particular genetic polymorphism, or SNP, if you like. And they would have had to have done that on a repeat basis to be reliable and repeatable that they actually did chronically have the level of LDL that they... Because genes actually react to the environment in which you place them. Your diet can have an effect, for example. Did they do that? Did they track these people's diet at all? Are we done? And proportional risk reduction. Well, that's an adjusted statistic. That's a fantasy made up by these authors on the basis of, well, let's have a look at their methodology, because this is science, and as such, a science paper should... One of the signs of a good science paper that's robust and trustworthy is you can pick that paper up, read what those authors did, and you could repeat that study. It should be like a cookbook. Cookbook! Okay? You should be able to follow the instructions and know exactly what these authors have done. Let's see, shall we? Design and rationale, yes. Our study consisted of several interrelated components. Okay. First, we selected a priori. There you go. They've even admitting it. We selected a priori. 9 SNPs, polymorphisms, located in 6 different genes. Okay. Each of these polymorphisms has been previously reported to be associated with LDL-C, but not to be reliably associated with other lipoproteins, so what? Or non-lipid risk factors for coronary heart disease, none of which are established anywhere in the literature because there are no experimental studies that can inform on that question of risk. So a priori, the whole thing, without any logic underpinning any of it. No external validity whatsoever. Are we done yet? No? Okay, let's carry on. Because surely this will tell us exactly what these authors did do so that we can copy it and see if we get the same result. We selected these SNPs specifically to minimize the potential for confounding pleiotropy. Okay, did you actually assess for that? Where are the characteristics, where are the dataset characteristics of these individuals reported so that we can see whether they were, other than this particular one SNP, genetically as identical as possible, phenotypically at least as identical as possible? Did they express the same body weight? Did they express the same incidence of type 1 and type 2 diabetes? Did they have the same, all of that? Were they the same amount of smoking, drinking? Were their diets remotely similar? Did we have a matched pair situation with a non-SNP carrier that would tell us anything about this? No. Are we done yet? I don't know. For each SNP, we defined the exposure allele as the allele previously associated with lower LDL-C. So one that's been associated in the past with people who happened on those studies to have measured LDL-C below the average level probably once, on one occasion, on average. In a small number probably, because there aren't many studies that do huge numbers of LDL tests. And while we're at it, an LDL test is an estimate and not an actual measurement in most lab panels that are done. Whoops. Are we done yet? Okay. Second, we concluded a series of meta-analyses to quantify the association between the exposure allele for each SNP and circulating levels of LDL-C. Okay, so they said, here are the SNPs we've selected. Do the people that have these SNPs have a lower than average LDL? Yes, they did. On one occasion, probably. Okay, fine. Third, we conducted a series of meta-analyses to quantify the association between the exposure allele, for each SNP, and the risk, again with that word, the risk, they say, of coronary heart disease. Over what period of time? Compared with what? Compared with their non-matched paired average person? Are we done yet? Okay. Fourth, we standardized the association between the exposure allele for each SNP and the risk of CHD per unit lower LDL-C. So you took your actual observation and you ignored that observation and you adjusted it to something else to suit yourself on the basis a priori of LDL-C, which is not causally related to heart disease anyway. Are we done yet? Okay. To directly compare the effect, it says no, because effect is the conjugate of cause, remember, and you haven't done an experiment. This is an associative study of long-term exposure to LDL-C. On the risk, it says no, of coronary heart disease mediated by a variety of different mechanisms. No. It doesn't look at any one mechanism at all. None. Fifth, we combined the effect estimates for each exposure allele on the risk, it says, of coronary heart disease adjusted per unit lower LDL-C in a meta-analysis to obtain a more precise overall summary estimate of the effect, it says, of long-term exposure to LDL-C on the risk, it says, of coronary heart disease. Are we done yet? Sixth, we compared the risk reduction associated with long-term exposure to lower LDL-C estimated from the combined meta-analysis of the genetic studies with the risk reduction associated with the same magnitude of LDL-C reduction observed in a meta-analysis of statin trials. Are we done? Are any of you any the wiser as to what they actually did do here and what it is that is being compared with exactly what on this chart here? No? Okay, if you're not done with this, I can't help you any further. I think I've been pretty clear on the value of this kind of nonsense. This is not science. This is rubbish. This is absolute, utter rubbish. Okay? Let's get back to Chris, though, in his infinite lack of wisdom, shall we? There he is. Chris, we missed you, son.
But it raises good questions. The first...
Yes, I think I've just raised several pretty good questions. Don't you think, boys and girls? Pretty good questions indeed.
is whether LDL is the only causal factor.
No. The questions I've raised point to a question as to whether LDL is in fact a causal factor at all. The answer is no, it isn't, apparently.
The lead author of the paper where I got this stunning graph, Brian.
The stunning graph, yep.
Ference had something to say about that.
So this is the guy who got paid a lot of money by statin companies to hold a certain opinion. I thought industry-funded charlatans were of no value and weren't worth listening to or paying attention to, Chris.
Numerous randomized trials have demonstrated that lowering LDL and lowering systolic blood pressure each reduce the risk of cardiovascular.
False. There are no studies that show any such thing. Absolutely no studies whatsoever. Mr. Borton paid for.
And what we found is that the combination of exposure to both lower LDL and lower systolic blood pressure.
Okay, did you measure that? Repeatedly in your subjects over multiple decades, multiple times a week, so that you can get an actual gauge on the exposure that you're talking about? Did you do that? No.
Have independent, additive, and dose-dependent effects on the life.
They're just words about a data set that cannot inform on what you propose it can inform on, because you're talking about exposure and you haven't fucking measured exposure. You ought to be locked up. You ought to be stripped of any academic qualifications whatsoever, frankly, and you ought to be locked up in a prison cell. This is disgraceful.
Lifetime risk of cardiovascular disease.
No, not risk. You cannot inform on risk with an epidemiological study. Not at all.
So that, for example, just 0.3 millimoles lower LDL and 5 millimeters of mercury lower systolic blood pressure was associated with a 50% lower lifetime risk of cardiovascular disease.
Okay, so which one of those was causal? Or was neither causal? And if so, can you give me the exact level of causality for each of those factors from your associative, uncontrolled, mishmash claptrap? No? Not science.
These are the kinds of decreases that can be achieved with commonly prescribed diets like the DASH diet.
The second
The DASH diet has been shown time and again to be ineffective, in fact.
question is, why are statins less effective than good genes if they achieve the same level of LDL?
Because LDL doesn't cause heart disease.
Dr. Ferentz's hypothesis is good genes protect you from birth, whereas statins usually enter the picture late when plaque is already built up.
So an opinion. A bought and paid for opinion.
Another author on the paper, Ronald Krauss, believes...
Again, no good. Risk, no. This study cannot inform on risk. This is not an experiment. We're done.
Statins are only partially effective in sweeping away the most harmful LDL particles.
There are no harmful LDL particles. None at all.
That statins would have a lesser effect on smaller LDL particles.
So what?
Because they're more dependent on receptor-mediated uptake. And in fact, we've shown that.
And in fact, if you say in fact in front of something, it makes it true, even if it isn't, apparently. No.
Does he believe statins are not at least partially effective?
Having said that, there is absolutely no doubt that the LDL lowering effect of statins contributes to reduced heart disease.
There absolutely is doubt, in fact. I'll tell you what it is straight away. Okay, given that cardiovascular atherosclerotic disease burden is underpinned absolutely by chronic systemic inflammation and inflammatory process, anything that is anti-inflammatory may be the mechanism by which any potential impact of any kind on any disease process involving said inflammation. If something is anti-inflammatory, that might be it. Are statins anti-inflammatory? Yes, they are. Ergo, it might well have nothing whatsoever to do with LDL, and in fact, it does not have anything to do with LDL quite clearly, quite unambiguously, if you are actually someone who is free to speak their mind because they haven't been bought and paid off by a company that makes statin medications that want you to believe that LDL is the absolute cause of heart disease when it isn't. Okay?
Risk. I think that's unquestionable.
Well, you're wrong. Okay, and you ought to be struck off the medical register because that is totally unsupportable scientifically or ethically. That whole statement is just ridiculous from the ground up. Right.
Dr. Noakes is super active on Twitter and often posts that LDL is not causal. So I tweeted in one of his threads that I can see how this could be controversial in the past, but it's hard to understand now.
Well, no, it's not, because this stunning chart, Chris, cannot inform on causality in any way, shape or form. And this data set, you can't even tell me, because I couldn't find out for myself, what was being related exactly to what. We've covered that in detail already, if you would like to just rewind a few minutes and look through it again. You are that destitute of competence that you think this stunning chart is proof of anything. It's not. It's a pretty picture.
In the age of so many high-quality studies.
These are not high-quality studies.
Including the addition of Mendelian randomizations.
Which is anything but high-quality study on cause and effect. It's the furthest thing from cause and effect you can get. Just about.
Studies which remove even more uncertainty.
No, they don't. They don't remove any uncertainty at all. There is nothing in that data set that provides any information of utility regarding cause and effect in any way, shape, or form.
He responded, probably best place to put this graph in the context of all the evidence are those who challenged the lipid hypothesis. And then he called out to a number of people, including Dr. Asim Malhotra. But no one responded, and I don't know what the response would be other than to attack Mendelian randomization studies, and that seems like a very hard thing to do.
Not really. I did it without breaking a sweat, Chris. I've totally dismissed and debunked your pseudoscientific crackpottery and nonsense without even watching this video through in full beforehand. Because I've seen these arguments a million times, and they are just so easily dismissed. Okay? Show me a study with a repeatable research design and methodology that is properly controlled, properly randomized in the first place, properly observed, of the right tenure, of appropriate statistical power, that can inform on the cause and effect relationship between LDL-C and anything else, and I will sit up and pay attention, Chris. Until then, you have nothing. Not a damn thing. Less than a damn thing. Goodness, if it could just rain a bit more, though, that'd be nice. It's rained so much this week, it's incredible. Anyway, you don't want to hear about the rain. Carry on.
Successfully. But Chris, you say, they've made tons of videos about cholesterol that got millions of views. How could you miss them? It's true. Stan Ekberg made an episode saying your doctor is wrong, 1 million views. Ken Berry on statin deception, 500,000 views. Mark Hyman, cholesterol is not the cause, 500,000 views. Dr. Noakes frequently retweets Ken Berry, so let's see what he has to say.
The cell membrane of every single cell in your body has cholesterol in the membrane. The membrane will not function if you don't have cholesterol. So how does it make any sense that this thing that's absolutely vital for life for the last 100,000 years now magically
more like forever, Ken. Since there have been living cells, cholesterol has been required, but okay.
Lipitor and Zocor on the market is really bad for you, and you should try to lower it and not eat any of it at all. You see the illogic nature of that? There's no common sense in that at all.
Let's think about that. Fat is essential too, but lately the body's been making way too much of it and putting it in all the wrong places, like
out of carbohydrates is what it's been making that fat out of, Chris. Inappropriate, unnecessary exogenous carbohydrates.
Our livers. Why would the body do that?
Your body actually makes 3,000 milligrams of cholesterol every day. Why would your body do that?
Second, we're not talking about cholesterol in cell membranes. We're talking about the body putting it in our arteries. Let's see if Dr. Berry can...
The body doesn't put cholesterol in your arteries. Another fallacy, Chris. That's not how atheroscleroses present. That's not the morphology of an atherosclerotic plaque. You think they're made up of cholesterol? Buffoon. No.
Can give us a masterclass on going viral by hitting the most viral themes. Anger.
We were tricked by some early research done on cholesterol and saturated fat. And then, of course, the big drug companies picked that up and ran with that because they sniffed billions of dollars in the air. They made the doctors look like buffoons.
Fear.
If I were able to magically reach through your screen and grab all your cholesterol out of your body right now, do you know what would happen? You would die within minutes.
Surprise?
There's almost no research that shows that your LDL level is meaningfully related to your risk of heart attack and stroke.
There is, in fact, none of any kind at all, Ken. It's not that there's not much. There is none that shows that.
Stroke.
Conspiracy?
No, fact. There is no evidence that can inform on risk of any disease process as that relates to any aspect of dietary intakes, cholesterol included, in human beings. Not one data point anywhere in the literature. Zero. None at all. I hope I've been clear on that.
Only after we lowered everyone's cholesterol with the statin drugs did we start having an Alzheimer's epidemic. I'm not saying it caused it. I'm saying it sure does look related, don't you think?
Sharing.
If you've got a friend or your dad or mom or your uncle or your cousin or your next door neighbor's been worried to death about their cholesterol, please share this video with them so they can take a breath and relax.
Happiness.
The take-home message is stop worrying about your total cholesterol. It is meaningless.
Ugh, I hate saying this. I'd so much rather talk about my granddaughter Caitlin's new puppy. But that so reminds me of the televangelist who got most of my grandma's retirement. Similar techniques, different context. Ugh. In order to make great...
So that was your comeback to what Ken Berry had to say? Really? Wow. Well, I'm convinced. How about you, boys and girls? Leave me a comment under the video to explain to me what I missed in terms of the logic presented there by Chris.
Great scientific advances like Mendelian randomization.
Mendelian randomization is not a scientific advance. The ability to look at our genes is a scientific advance. The Human Genome Project is a scientific advance. Mendelian randomization studies are not. They're another form of associative, ill-disciplined, naturalistic observation without control. They are not science.
It takes hard work and very deep understanding of genetics, biochemistry, study design, big data, etc.
And you don't have any of that, Chris. None. So why are you making these videos? Why are you still here? Why are you still talking?
Tragically, the scientists who do it don't have time for social media, and they don't like to exploit those viral tricks. So we're getting our info from people who aren't doing science, they're doing social media.
Well, Chris, hello. I've been a publishing research scientist in the field of nutrition, among other areas, for a very, very long time. Okay? I'm here to point to your destitution of comprehension of science, scientific endeavour, and how it is that we litigate cause and effect and inform ourselves on what's likely to be the best behaviour. But you want to ignore that, don't you? It's your arrogance and Dunning Kruger that won't allow you to actually engage with me. And probably, your ego, because you know that as soon as you actually engage with me in a debate about this topic, I will absolutely wreck you. Clown.
Media, and they really know how to go viral. While I was on Twitter, I read through Dr. Noakes' stream. He had recently been banned for misinformation on his main account.
Yeah, well, who's to say what's misinformation, Chris? Because that's all we get from you is misinformation from start to finish. Fact checkers are usually 15-year-old boys in their mummy's basements with acne and Pop-Tarts. Okay?
He retweeted a lot about vaccines, Jeffrey Epstein's death, and the one that apparently got him banned was promoting the idea that European leaders didn't actually get the COVID vaccine. They faked it with saline solutions because they knew the vaccine was harmful. He also talked about things like ivermectin in his interviews.
You're not allowed to prescribe ivermectin in South Africa. Well, who says that a doctor can't prescribe a medication? That's unbelievable.
So I thought, okay, he has clearly gone down the conspiracy theory path.
Chris, you really, really need to wake up to yourself, son. You need to wake up to how stupid you come across. I have once again in this video eviscerated you beyond belief and pointed squarely to your destitution of character, your destitution of competence, your ideology, and your steaming, stinking, pustulous hypocrisy. But you'll ignore me again, I'm sure you will.
I don't know what would cause a scientist I admired for so long to go down that path, but I guess there can be many reasons. But I will always be grateful for...
How about he knows something you don't know? Many things you don't know, Chris. What about that?
Whoever recommended David McCraney's book to me, How Minds Change. What a wonderful book. So, true confession, when I saw Tim's retweets, like 20 a day of terrible conspiracy theorists, I thought, you know what, maybe I should drop this episode, and so I put it on.
Yeah, you should have, Chris, because you're making yourself look an absolute fool. And you've provided absolutely nothing to hang your hat on scientifically at all. All you've done is point to your own scientific incompetence.
But what brought me back to it is curiosity about the size of his audience, and the audience of people he's retweeting. Ken Berry, Asim Malhotra, and so on. They're very influential in health science. So I said doing the episode on Dr. Bickman helped me understand many of the comments on my channel, and this one is doing the same thing. For example, here's a common comment I get about Ansel Keys. Swanee said, the 7-country study is one of the most cherry-picked, distorted, and debunked studies in the history of nutrition.
Facts, though.
Having read so many of Dr. Key's studies and coming away with the impression that he was the best we've ever had in nutrition science.
Well, then you're an idiot, Chris. There's just no other way to describe how destitute you are of competence then. Ansel Keys should have spent the remainder of his life in a prison cell. When it came out what he had done, which was cherry-pick his data, academic misconduct of the highest order.
I asked Marion Nessel about him.
To me, Ansel Keys is a great hero.
Well, you should also go to prison then, Marion. You should have joined him in prison.
He was an extraordinary researcher.
No, he wasn't. False.
Who did first...
What he was an extraordinarily good builder of consensus, an extraordinary bully, frankly. Ask Sir Philip Randall about that and see, well, you can't because he's no longer with us, but go and check that one out for yourself as to what happened there, for example. Also, Ansel Keys was a bloke who was expert at muscling his way in on a field of study that he had no business being in at all because it wasn't his field. He was a cold water fish physiologist, not a nutritionist at all.
Great work in a number of fields. The 7-country study was only one of the many things that he...
You mean the 22-country study?
Did. He also was an expert on high-altitude physiology. He did a study of starvation during the Second World War that is the most amazing thing I've ever seen. Nobody's ever gone anywhere near.
So this is somebody's opinion about somebody. Who cares about the opinion of this, frankly, old woman? Anyone that thinks Ansel Keys was a great man and a hero in any way, shape, or form has no credibility in my book whatsoever. None at all.
Near it in terms of its level of detail, quality, the findings from it still hold up extremely well.
No, they don't. Not at all. There are now something like 10 or a dozen major meta-analyses regarding saturated fat and its so-called relationship with coronary heart disease, cardiovascular disease. All 10 disagree with Ansel Keys. Hello, have you ever been to reality? Old woman. No? Okay.
You know, I once asked the question, why wasn't he Nobel Prize winning? Why?
Because he was a criminal and ought to have been locked up in prison.
Why wasn't he extolled with, you know, fantastic awards and honors? We're still talking about the Mediterranean diet.
Doesn't exist.
And that was his construct.
Somewhere
Construct. Yeah, good.
are the negative comments about Keyes coming from?
From the fact that he was a criminal who cherry-picked his data in order to get a publication and to build a niche for himself that he had no business doing. From the fact that he was directly, personally responsible for more untimely death and suffering than Hitler and Pol Pot put together. By orders of magnitude. Try that.
And I wrote 11 columns on insulin resistance, and then that led me into Ansel Keys and his cholesterol con, and I've just completed the 14 parts to that.
Those articles are hosted on CrossFit's site under the banner of scientific misconduct.
Correct. And that's where they belong.
And mixed with articles about why scientists cheat and pathological science, whatever that is.
Yes.
Tim's subtitle is The Greatest Scam in Medical History.
Correct. Well, it's been supplanted recently, actually.
One of his primary sources is the journalist Nina Teicholz, author of The Big Fat Surprise. She's had this to say about Keyes.
Keyes did a lot of, there's hardly a better word for it than kind of saying fudging the data. And he published it in obscure German-only journals. I had to go back to obscure places. He really didn't want this data to get out.
What she's referring to is the 7-country study that Keyes organized in 1958. And
you mean the 21 countries study?
Ran until 1975 when he retired. Henry Blackburn took over from there and saw it through its 50-year anniversary. I correspond with Henry often. He's still razor sharp and writing at 97. I've never seen Nina back up her claim that Keyes faked data, and I scoured Tim's very long essays.
She didn't say fake. She said fudged. That's a very different thing. Cherry-picking is fudging, Chris.
And couldn't...
Faking is when you adjust a data set using multiple variate regression before you publish your outputs. That's faking. Fudging example is cherry-picking. Okay? Hope that's clear.
Find it there either. How dozens of scientists involved in the study from around the world and in independent institutions could be persuaded to fake their data in the 700 publications they made.
Well, I think we've covered what it is that motivates many scientists to say what it is they say in the literature. That's why we should all really get back to litigating arguments about the science empirically, as I have done today, by completely destroying your vacuous, destitute argument, which you believe supports some causal relationship between cardiovascular disease and LDL-C, which doesn't even exist, Chris. That's for another day.
Many of them after Keyes retired and his death, and kept it a secret for the last 50 years. I don't know how to rank conspiracy theories, but it seems to...
Yeah, you've said conspiracy theories I don't know how many times in this little film of yours already, Chris. It provides you with no credibility whatsoever. What it shows is that you are actually unable to engage with the science and make an actually science-based argument. Why don't you do that instead? Tell you what, I'll give you an opportunity. Why don't you face me, man on man, for a face-to-face debate about the science underpinning so-called LDL-C and heart disease? Let's do that, Chris. We'll litigate it empirically. Okay? Conspiracy theory, though. All right.
To me, that's near the level of NASA fake the moon landing, especially considering how many modern studies confirm all that data they faked over 50 years.
There are no studies that confirm anything of the sort, Chris, because you're talking about cause and effect. There is no data to underpin a cause and effect relationship between LDL-C, so-called, and anything else.
Tim does reference some scientists who pushed back hard on Keyes in the day. One was Dr. George Mann, who famously published a book about it in 1993, and this opinion piece in the New England Journal of Medicine, Diet Heart, End of an Era, in 1978. That title didn't age too well. The world is still talking about diet heart. George had the belief that diet didn't matter, but exercise did. He had studied populations like the Maasai and noted how active they were. George used a lot of conspiratorial language. And
there we go again. Chris, you need to actually get some tools, some scientific tools. If you want to engage with discussions about science and be credible, you need to be able to critically analyze, empirically, a piece of work. And you've shown in this little film of yours that you are singularly incapable of so doing. You even made the mistake of suggesting that an author with 2 affiliations to industry was a reason to completely dismiss everything they had to say without even looking at it. And then you spent several minutes not even competently analysing a pretty chart put together by some people who, well, you guys saw, didn't you? You saw the conflict of interest statement there. Really, Chris? Seriously, sunshine? Hello? Wow, incredible.
And I wondered if that attracted Tim and Nina. In that New England Journal article, he wrote, soon the committee men were falling in line. This scientific issue was settled by majority votes. Galileo would have flinched. The dietary dogma was a moneymaker for segments of the food industry, a fundraiser for the Heart Association, and busy work for thousands of fat chemists. He looked at data from the 7 countries study and noticed some...
You mean the 21 countries study?
People who exercised less had more heart attacks, which reinforced his thinking. I asked Henry about that because he knew George really well and they engaged in many debates together. Henry sent me this letter from Keyes to the editor of the New England Journal.
So now you're going to present the opinion of a completely untrained person in science. Oh, okay. Right. Conspiracy theory, though.
Journal of Medicine about George's paper. Mann misrepresents data from the 7 countries study
21
and states Keyes' 7 country study indicates quite clearly that exercise protects in those populations. But the data he refers to simply illustrate the not surprising fact that men who have suffered a myocardial infarction often tend to avoid heavy physical labor. I know that tendency well because when my father got heart disease, I always had to mow the lawn because he said it would strain his heart.
Hang on. Was that the same father you were talking about earlier? With the clear arteries, that one? How many fathers have you got, Chris?
Be remarked, of course, that even if it should be proved that physical inactivity contributes to the risk of developing coronary heart disease, that would not indicate that diet is unimportant. The idea of single causation for coronary heart disease belongs to the...
I don't think anybody sensible is remotely claiming that diet is unimportant as that relates to health aspects, including cardiovascular health. I'm certainly not. Tim Noakes certainly is not. Nina Teicholz, although she's not a scientist, certainly is not. Asim Malhotra certainly is not. Doctors Baker and Chafee are not. I don't know anyone that's suggesting what you're now flinging around as some kind of conspiracy theory. Do you have anything to say of any value, Chris, whatsoever?
Dark Ages and was never espoused by me. Among recognized risk factors, age, sex, and blood pressure may be more important than the diet, but heredity, smoking, habitual exercise, diabetes, various metabolic peculiarities, and even personality also need research and public health attention. That's the thing about actually reading what Keyes wrote. You come away saying, wow, that stood the test of time.
But it really didn't, because Keyes' main platform was that saturated fat was causal in heart disease, and it isn't. Demonstrably, clearly, unequivocally, Keyes falls flat on his face, and he falls flat on his face because his assertion was based on a cherry-picked data set that was designed to show that so he could get published at that time and build a career for himself and a niche for himself under that argument, for which he was richly, handsomely rewarded by those with a financial interest in supporting him in so doing. Okay? It's really straightforward. It's not a conspiracy. It's history. It's known facts. All of this is out there in the public domain, Chris, if you'd bothered to actually check. It is a fact. Ancel Keys cherry-picked his data. He misled the readership of the scientific literature. He misled the medical and nutrition communities, and he misled the general public at large. Criminally. As a result, hundreds of millions, if not billions, of people have died before their time and suffered unnecessarily directly because of his lack of moral upstanding fibre. Are we done with Ancel Keys yet?
Not much of what Dr. Mann wrote aged well. Even his propensity to study small remote populations like the Maasai and Inuit didn't age well, because modern genetic studies have revealed them to not be like the broader world population. Inuits have a genetic mutation, for example, that
Inuit, not Inuits.
Keeps them from going into ketosis, possibly evolution's way of protecting them against long-term health effects of ketosis.
Yes. That's why you shouldn't attempt to be in ketosis all the time. Watch my Fine Actually Science-Based channel for much more information on that and how the diet should be organised to maximise your likelihood of health outcomes which are desirable long-term.
Dr. Noakes wrote a very large book that I tried to read, Real Food on Trial.
Tried to read? Did it have big words in it, Chris? Was that the problem? Was conspiratorial one of them?
Diet dictators tried to destroy a top scientist.
How about conflict of interest? Was that in there at all? What about cherry picking? Was that mentioned in the book? Was it, Chris? Did Tim's book hurt your feels? Was that the issue?
In the book, he is the top scientist and the victim. I couldn't get over the irony of him writing an 11-part series trying to destroy the legacy of Ancel Keys and accusing him of some pretty nasty conspiracies.
Oh, God. Do you know any other words, Chris? Any at all?
What actually happened to Dr. Noakes is doctors and nutritionists didn't want him recommending weaning children on a high saturated fat, low-carb diet as he was doing. It was similar to their effort to curb prescribing ivermectin in South Africa for curing COVID-19, which apparently was widespread. Dr. Noakes refused and went to trial, and he and Nina turned it into a big conspiratorial spectacle.
Oh, Jesus Christ, really? You're on the wrong side of everything here, Chris. Science, history, the facts. Not a single thing that's come out of your ridiculous, rancid, pustulous gob has been worth the time of day, as usual, son.
That helped make him famous in South Africa.
You're nothing but a propagandist, a criminal propagandist, Chris. You have no basis, no expertise. This is not your niche at all. You ought to go to prison for what you're doing here. Absolutely unbelievable nonsense.
Tim and Nina did exactly what you would expect them to do. Overwhelm the jury with days of testimony.
With actual data and science and the facts and stuff. How dare they?
From old, obscure conspiratorial reference.
Oh, shut the fuck up, you fucking moron. I've had a gutsful. I've really had a fucking gutsful. I'm not even going to, there's only a few minutes left, and I am fucking done with Chris. This is absolutely, completely out of order. From start to finish. Not a single scrap of science, not a single inkling of competence to even speak about science. Nothing but spin doctory, propaganda, ideology, and fucktardery of the highest order. Join me next time, boys and girls, when someone else will be wrong on interwebs, but not as wrong as Chris, and not as offensive as Chris. He's his own category of offensive, this character, and I'm sick of looking at his fucking mug. So he's out of here, and so are we. See you later, boys and girls. I'm going on holiday now for a bit, and I'll see you when I get back, with possibly a different style. I'm going to have a think about how I'm doing things. And we'll see. Let me know what you thought about the style of this one underneath. Leave me a comment and I'll read it when I'm not sitting on the beach or something. All right. See you then. Ciao for now. Let's have some music. 2, 3, 4.